We are coming to you today, I think, from Sedona, Arizona, right, Troy?
That's right. I'm in Sedona for the month. Yeah.
Cool. Well, welcome. I'm really happy you're participating in our Leaders Who Care series because we love talking about people who are innovative and who do care enough to bring good to the world through their business, basically. And I really love what you're doing, and we'll chat about it. But can you briefly, semi-formally introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, and then we'll chat?
Totally. So I'll just do a little overview. So I'm a co-founder of a company called RIZOME, and RIZOME is pioneering bamboo engineered lumber, which is a climate positive building material. And we're also doing large scale native reforestation and bamboo agroforestry, both for drawing down CO2 from the atmosphere and storing it in biomass in the built environment, but also for ecosystem restoration and social and economic justice in equatorial regions or wherever bamboo grows. So it's a little bit about what we're doing right now. On a sort of like resume level, I went to Stanford. Was an early employee at Airbnb, worked in another hardware company, started my own company, ran it for a few years, sold it, and have basically spent the last 6 or 7 years in a deep um, in a deep dive on how do we actually do something good versus just doing things that sound good.
Right.
And there's quite a bit of difference. Also a bit disenchanted with business in general. And so this is the first entrepreneurial venture that I have committed to during that time. A long period of research and exploration, and finally coming back around into a project that is having real impact on people and on ecological systems.
Yeah, well, give credit where it's due. We met at Sustainatopia virtual conference, and I was really impressed on how you presented and your knowledge. You're clearly the expert on steroids here, beyond me, of the topic. So I'm going to let you lead on that. But I do see like some great stuff that's going to happen from what you're doing. And with respect to what you said about people saying they care, or people trying to do good but really maybe aren't, it's taken decades to almost get to this point where leaders of companies have realized that if they align their business with social impact, it's actually good for their business.
Right.
Not to mention attracting really good people like yourself and other talent to come work at their business because they want that purpose too. So you're a change maker now, effectively. We joked around the first time I talked with you, with my experience of bamboo was mostly the lucky bamboo, and you told me it wasn't even real bamboo. That's what people I think about a little bit. So if you could tell me, first of all, and I call this a push question, what differentiates you as a true leader who cares? And with that, segue a little bit into what you're doing will make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had a couple associations from what you just said. One is businesses that are working on something important and large enough can attract great people. And we've found that. I've found that. One, I would not be involved in this if it was not a climate-based project, like if it was not solving something. And at the moment, you could say that the climate crisis is one of the major themes of the decade. And this is a very complex, it's a complex issue.
Yeah.
I often quote Charles Eisenstein as, he wrote a great book on climate that is a more holistic way of thinking about what is really going on right now, in terms of climate, and what are the drivers and levers, rather than just a mechanistic way of thinking, okay, so we have 1 trillion tons of CO2 in the atmosphere that we need to draw down, but CO2 isn't the only metric that we need to measure against. So why is the CO2 being emitted anyway? And what sort of ecological systems do we need to prioritize? And so one is a technological solution, and that's something that Rhizome provides, is a technological solution to replace wood, steel, and concrete, each of which have really, really significant greenhouse gas emissions. So, building and the built environment takes up about a third of the basically anthropogenic carbon emissions. So that's a big deal. A lot of that goes into embodied carbon for steel and concrete. So one avenue is technological. Smart people who want to apply their intelligence and commitment need some mechanism for that. But then there's also another level, which is there are many technological solutions, particularly in the climate space, that address the metric of CO2, but don't necessarily address the underlying issues. And one of the things that I care about is addressing the cause, not just the symptom. And so I believe that reforestation, agroforestry, regenerative agriculture, and regenerative, circular local economies, these are great buzzwords. What do they actually mean? I can give an example of how we do it.
Sure.
So bamboo, climate positive building material, the more you build with it, the more CO2 drawdown stored in buildings. So on a technological level, really great. We're mostly operating in the Philippines and on the rural island of Mindanao that has seen pretty much 100% deforestation over the past 50 years. And most of the bamboo was planted so far to do erosion control, flood control, that's killed a lot of people. More than just killed a lot of people, it's a totally destabilized ecosystem. And so, reforestation and bamboo agroforestry solves some of these issues directly at the causal level. So one, it provides a level of economic security for local farmers and indigenous populations where they are no longer incentivized to cut down the forest, essentially. And financial security, like food security, it's a real thing.
It is.
If you're only, I'm hearing an echo right now.
No, I'm good.
Go back for a sec. Hello, hello, hello. Yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
So food security and financial security is a real issue, particularly in developing countries, but globally. If people have enough and they have agency over the land at a level that's at community rather than necessarily individual or corporate landowners, people do pretty well at taking care of land and not exploiting it. Actually, numerous studies and examples of where indigenous people have agency over their land, like they do pretty well. It's only when there are pressures, whether these are economic pressures or legal pressure, to use the resources in a more intense way. So bamboo's great. One, it's a fast time to harvest. You can harvest it in the first 7 years. You can harvest it every year. And this is different than trees where maybe you wait 30 or 40 years. And then when you harvest, it requires really large machinery, which is inherently a centralized operation. And so, you have these huge machines, multi-million-dollar companies, they're the only ones that can afford the big machines. Suddenly, lumber companies own everything, and it's no longer taken care of. Maybe it's harvested sustainably, but sustainable harvesting also doesn't necessarily touch the core issue, which is the longing in the human soul to be around ancient trees and natural ecosystems that definitely take longer than 50 years to come into a state of complexity and biodiversity and beauty. So, if every human was able to have contact with that level of nature, they wouldn't want to just go cut it down. That's sort of a belief in my system. So reforestation and agroforestry are really essential components to the climate crisis, but also just as a as a way that human beings should live in general. And so if we can provide a technological and supply chain mechanism that incentivizes reforestation, great. And that is a big enough problem and a compelling enough solution that we can work with the best people in the world. Like, I actually get to like work with such world-class people every day that are more committed, and it's not just a job. And so it's a real gift.
Yeah, no, I think that's brilliant what you're saying in all levels about the air, the environment, the land, the soil, the trees, and the people. They all play, and I love what you said. Most people wouldn't want to cut down a tree, but if they don't see it, then they don't do anything. It's almost like they have, basically, even though they didn't do it themselves. One of the things that I've always found is that the thing that fills people's hearts and souls more than anything is belonging. And we've come a long way from Mother Nature's basics of growing our own food on our own land in our community to putting all kind of pesticides and whatever on them and shipping them somewhere that they get there, a week later, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it doesn't do our health much good that way. And it takes away the belonging of growing our own thing. And there's something called, I don't know if you're familiar with it, Steward, STEWARD, Steward Enterprise, which is about a company that all the profits go to the purpose of that company, not to potentially what we need to do to sell the company later or anything like that. You can have investors, you have people making good money working there, but profits go to purpose. And it sounds a little bit like that's something that you would love structure to be. Let me ask you another question. How do you foresee what's the future in with respect to planting these trees, preparing them, distributing them, and who are the likely customers?
Great. So one, business operations, I can get into that. I just wanted to key off belonging for a second and just highlight it as, right on. I would say belonging has been violated at so many levels in the modern urban environment that most people don't realize that they don't feel belonging, and that it is such a lonely place to live. I mean, even the gorgeous, beautiful house that you live in right now, that we don't realize what we've lost at the level of community, at the level of architecture and beauty, at the level of sound and darkness. There are so many levels in which belonging kind of sort of like seeps into our body system. And so I just wanted to like key on that for a point. So how does belonging then relate to like what we are doing? Yeah, so what we do very broadly, we go plant bamboo. So we in the Philippines right now, we work with indigenous groups and small farmers. We operate nurseries. So people take bamboo from the native forest or from propagated forests. Take node cuttings, which means you cut a bamboo into lots of little sections. You plant the node in the ground, or you put it in a nursery for 3 months, and then you go plant it in the ground on usually deforested land. In Mindanao, there's an invasive grass species that causes a lot of grass fires, and the bamboo is pretty much the only thing that can survive easily without a lot of weeding. Also survives grass fires in a clump or a chomp taken by a cow, for example. So it's a great reforestation pioneer. It's also, we only use clumping species rather than running bamboo species. So sometimes bamboo is considered an invasive species because it starts spreading. We don't use that kind of bamboo. So it's able to basically a pioneer species for reforestation. We then either wait a bunch of years and then go harvest, or we harvest what's currently available. And what's currently available now is mostly in Southeast Asia. The really high quality bamboo is found in Southeast Asia, the largest dimensions and best mechanical characteristics. So we harvest the bamboo, we bring it to a local processing facility that we operate, take a round pole of bamboo and cut rectangles out of it, basically. So these are long, thin, actually, I've got one right here. These are long, thin boards, about 10 feet long. They're super strong, right? Like, I'm pretty strong. Like, that's a really strong, mechanically superior material to wood. At least 2.5 times as strong as Douglas fir, way more fire resistant. So it's a very compelling material technically to build everything from skyscrapers to residential homes. Right now we make panels. It's basically we make sheets of plywood, and plywood is an input into pretty much everything in the built environment right now. The walls behind you, they're built out of plywood. Maybe they have gypsum on top, but any sort of any flat surface is probably plywood of some sort, whether it's OSB or other sorts of plywood. So we make an alternative. It's a technically superior alternative that looks great, that's super durable, super fire resistant, really strong. And by this time next year, it'll actually be cheaper than comparable structural wood. So that's a big deal. And over time, we believe that the price of bamboo will go down and down and down as manufacturing efficiency scales and as genetic selection, we're able to get thicker and thicker and larger species of bamboo. And that won't be the case for wood. Right now, the wood market is seeing major shortages, major price increases. We do pretty well in North America and Scandinavia, for example, like harvested sustainably. That's not the case in pretty much everywhere else in the world. You go to India, you go to Indonesia, you go to Philippines, Bangladesh. These are places that have seen near 100% deforestation and either have logging moratoriums or there are just no trees. So reforestation for lumber to build a low embodied carbon, environment, it won't happen with trees in the global south. So we need an alternative, because if the number of buildings that are expected to be built in developing regions around the world, in equatorial regions, are built out of steel and concrete, we're going to hit major thresholds for climate change that we really don't want to hit. So there has to be an alternative, and our alternative is bamboo.
Yeah, I saw, you'll hear some construction behind me now, so welcome to real life. But there was this story on Beijing, which is very clear about, all the deforestation and all the everything that was torn down to just build a whole bunch of buildings in Beijing. And we see what happened in Beijing, and we see what happened there. Let me ask you a question on that. Speaking of real life, do you find that during this whole perfect storm that we're in with, everything from the pandemic to racial justice to now the economy to everything, that people have had time to think even more and not think things maybe so much for granted, or realize, what we, where we're at, that you would think that companies like yours and a product like yours, and the fact that we're at home more even now, we would have an awareness that maybe we need to build our home a little bit differently. Maybe we need to do these things differently. Do you see that awakening, if you will, happening?
Yeah, I do. I mean, you can look at any architectural magazine from the last 6 months. It's all about low embodied carbon, which means we need to stop building with conventional steel and concrete, and we either need to be building with mass timber, CLT, so advanced wood materials, or we need to be building out of bamboo. Or if you live in a region where sort of more sort of like natural cottage industry built environment is relevant, like that's also great. But for most of the world and for most urban environments, we need a commodity scalable product. So totally, we've seen massive interest in solutions to climate change. How do we draw down CO2 from the atmosphere? We have a great and compelling story on that side. And in the built environment, how do we decarbonize buildings? I mean, that's a huge story, and it's the same story everywhere in the world. Um, Even in regions where you might think, oh, these are, I don't know, poor countries that don't prioritize the climate or something. It's really not true. Um, what we see is a deep commitment to, or at least a pretty deep awareness that climate change is not just change. There are crisis moments. I mean, we can take examples of flooding. Flooding in India, flooding in Bangladesh, killing hundreds of thousands of people, displacing millions and tens of millions. I mean, these are climate change and ecosystem collapse issues. And we need green ground cover, and we need to stop building buildings that contribute to the problem. And so, let's say, just brief underline of what is the mission of what we're doing, and it's not just us. Our mission is to sequester 10 gigatons of carbon by 2050 and make bamboo into a primary global construction material. And in order to do that, order of magnitude, we'll need to plant and harvest about 1 million hectares of bamboo by 2050. And that's about 1,000 processing facilities all around the world. That's a really big operation. But when I see the scope or the scale of that, we're like, yeah, actually, it's going to be fast, and it's going to require like a really large and sophisticated operation, but it's doable. And if it's doable for us, and we think it's actually a realistic possibility, that means only 100 other projects of similar scale need to be implemented over that time period in order to draw down 1,000 tons of CO2 and rebalance climate. And in the process of doing so, restore ecological systems and build cities and urban environments that are, gorgeous, walkable, low carbon cities. So, like, to me, that's a pretty optimistic, I wouldn't say irrationally optimistic, but actually reasonably optimistic perspective.
Yeah, I would say it's exactly what we need. We need a dramatic or significant change of how we do things, and we can do them. I mean, we can do them, and
Yeah.
I think that if any generation, I think every generation, including mine, because I'm just a touch older than you, what we call vintage now, as I think
Yeah.
I mentioned, wants to make a difference. But I truly believe the generation that's happening now is for all sorts of reasons, including urgency, seeing that they want to make a difference, and you want to make a difference, and you can make money at the same time. I want to ask you a quick question on some real life stuff too. Here we have a lot
Okay.
of wildfires in Phoenix too, a
Yeah.
lot of fires, and they're talking about how do you change the materials that the home won't catch on fire so quickly, or
Hmm.
things like that. Is there any impact on that type of thing?
Hmm. I mean, wildfires are also a pretty complex issue. I would say it's pretty hard to stop buildings catching on fire if they really want to catch on fire. I mean, bamboo is the only, like, basically our bamboo is the only Class A ASTM E84 fire rated material. It's in the same category as steel, concrete, gypsum, other other non-flammable materials. So that's a big deal.
That
So
is,
one
yeah,
of the reasons tall mast timber hasn't been implemented before is mostly fire code compliance. So bamboo solves a major problem in wood construction. You can sheath a building, like all the CLT members, which is cross-laminated timber. You can add layers of bamboo on the surface to make it a fire retardant surface that also looks great and that provides a tension layer. So one, bamboo is a great, like, fire resistant material. That's due both to the fiber structure of the material and density, but also for the fact that right now we treat it with borate, which is a fire retardant that is, I would say, pretty ecologically friendly. I wouldn't say it's 100%, depending on how it's used in other ways. We use it in a really ecological way. Um, I mean, I think we probably don't want to get into the whole, like, why do wildfires happen and why are they so bad? We
we
could
don't
be
have
here for
time for
another hour.
necessarily.
But in general, Um, Water restoration landscapes are critical. You know,
Yeah.
there is an unnatural level of dryness in most of the American Southwest and California, for example,
Hmm.
where the water isn't allowed to sink into the landscape. And so just the way we try to control water doesn't, you know, it's antiquated. It's based on inaccurate understandings of how water interacts with the natural world. So other possibilities, if people want to work on projects and scope out swales and small ponds and lakes for large scale water restoration, give me a call. It's something I'm also very interested in.
Well, that was going to lead to my last question. It's running out of time, but this has been great. If I'm pretend I'm a graduate, high school or college, my girlfriend's pissed at me because it wasn't my fault we didn't have prom, but we didn't have prom, and I'm thinking, you know, the economy's like going who knows where we're at. And I'm thinking, what now? What do I do next? What would you tell me?
Yeah. Hmm. I mean, maybe I would tell someone what I would have wanted to hear. Um, it's on a lot of different levels. One is belonging, that there is intrinsic belonging in your system, and that the people around you that, like, you do need people around you that are truly intimate to create a sense of belonging. So that is right now, you know, even more so, I'd say, than climate, it is our responsibility to create fields of belonging for ourselves and each other, whether that is in our work environment, whether that's in our friends, and open to that legitimate level of intimacy that is required to be a foundation of being able to express our passion and commitment to problems like the climate crisis, where if we are not nourished, we like, I can just as easily get burned out working on climate as working at Goldman Sachs. No offense about to Goldman Sachs, but where there is just a, so to be nourished and embedded in intimate relationships is important. Um, you will find them. And also to then, I would say it's easier than ever to actually find projects that are worth working at. There are some great climate related Slack channels, for example, and communities of people, entrepreneurs, investors, people who are like, I have a gift to give, and I have not yet found the harness for my energy. It's definitely out there. And if not, go start it, right? There are plenty of problems to address right now, particularly in climate, but on many levels, whether that's urban development, whether that's in health, whether that's in, you know, so many levels, because the level of paradigm, you can say paradigm shift right now,
Mhm.
um, means that many systems will be changing in this time. So, and honestly, starting a business is fun. Just go do it. It's so easy right now. It's so easy to get money. It's so easy to find collaborators. It's so easy to have quick iteration times, um, and there's very little risk, right? Like, so what? You waste a year of your life. Um,
Yeah, and I think and I think you're right, and I know how you meant waste, but you're not really wasting it.
yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
no, this is fantastic. We'll have to do chapter 2, the sequel or something, and keep this going. But thanks a million for participating. And like the hot
I
air
really
balloon
appreciate it,
behind
Mark.
you, like the hot air balloon behind you, you got, I guess the sky's the limit, right?
Yeah, I really appreciate the time. Just, and also just appreciate the your um, motivation to spend time sharing stories that you believe are relevant, and because you're not directly benefiting in any sort of conventionally measured way.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the time and the impact that you're having. So
Thanks, man.
so
I appreciate the new friendship too.
yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Have a great day, Mark.